Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to today's second HathiTrust Community Week session, digitizing and exhibiting copyrighted science fiction, presented by Alex Wermer-Colin from Temple University Libraries. And I know that you are all really excited, just like I am, for this session. Unfortunately, first I have to do a little housekeeping with you. So if you can go to the next slide, Alex. Even though this is a virtual session, we do remind you all that we do expect you to adhere to our code of conduct. Our code is on our website. It's here on this slide, and also it's going to be posted in the chat. And please do not be afraid to report any behavior that you feel is in violation of our code. Next slide. Oh, by the way, I am Melissa Stewart. Assistant to the Executive Director of HathiTrust, and I'm here joined today. My colleague Graham Detmers is helping me out and with monitoring the chat and adding all those great links for you. We are recording this session. As you know, we do have closed captioning turned on. It is automated captioning, so you will see those fun HathiTrust weird spellings in there, but the rest of it really is pretty good. So turn that on the bottom of your screen. Please use chat if you have any questions. We do have a lot of people in our session today. I will be reading the questions out loud today when at the appropriate time. And if you need any type of support, again, also put that in the chat, and Graham is going to help me with fielding those. Next slide. And then that's just how to do chat. Everybody is probably really good at using chat by now, but just a little refresher there at the bottom of the screen. Next slide. Tweet. If you want to tweet about this session on social media, please do that using the hashtag HTCW22 and adding HathiTrust. All right, now I am going to turn it over to Alex. Take it away, Alex.
Thank you, Melissa. Wanted to start by thanking everyone at HathiTrust for making this happen, letting me speak today. Graham and Melissa. I should also thank Natalie Fulkerson, Eleanor Cole, and Ryan Dubisnik, who have all been instrumental at various stages of this project and supporting my learning about HathiTrust and working with the material. So I'm going to overview a project today and show you a lot of different things, and it would be great to have time to talk with you all afterwards. So if there's something I kind of skip over and you're curious to learn more, please either post in the chat or feel free to reach out to me later. So this project started with a pretty simple question, and I found myself in a kind of interesting situation. I graduated from my PhD and had a Council of Library Information Resources postdoctoral fellowship at Temple University Libraries, where I still work. And when I began working there, the Digital Scholarship Center began a digitization project with the Special Collections Research Center of various excess science fiction books in the collection. And I'll talk more about that, but this position it put me in was, asking how can Temple University Libraries Digital Scholarship Center make this copyrighted literature available to researchers and teachers? And it was a kind of natural fit that HathiTrust would become one of the repositories for this material, in particular because it's established a lot of the precedent for providing modes of non-consumptive access, of access to material that isn't violating copyright law. And I can talk more about that too. But over the last 4 years or so, this project has slowly explored various ways to leverage the HathiTrust Digital Library and the HathiTrust Research Center. Where maybe it gets a little more interesting is we also investigated ways that we can develop parallel services, alternative models for called localized access to our curated materials. Essentially, how can we give this data to researchers if we're restricted by various laws? So I'll kind of talk about those two in parallel, and during this presentation, overview some of the kind of core aspects of HathiTrust that were relevant, and then ways we've been experimenting with kind of alternate, tools or methods. And I should just say this project, it's exciting to be talking about it now. It has been on hiatus for most of the pandemic. Most of the work that we did was before the pandemic. We had digitization stalled. We also had a research project that was stalled. Both those things are now picking up again. And so I have a graduate student worker, Megan Kane, currently at the Scholar Studio, working on the next set of materials we hope to ingest. So I'm excited to see kind of the frozen project thawing again and becoming more holistic. So I wanted to start with this picture. This is a picture of 100,000 science fiction book covers visualized in 3 dimensions. I got these book covers from the Internet Speculative Fiction database. They're free to download. And I use this visualization a lot to show kind of what's possible, and to think about what a total library might look like of science fiction materials. If you look at the same visualization from a distance, it looks like a constellation of stars, right? And the galaxy may be too big for this project to ever encompass. The book covers that we got from ISFDB, it's important to note, are very bad quality. And, as a result, the visualization isn't great. And so one of the hopes I have for this project is eventually, libraries will scan good quality images of 100,000 book covers, and visualizations like this might be a little more meaningful. So the big concept here that I wanted to start with is this concept of the Great Unread. It's coined by this Stanford scholar Margaret Cohen to refer to a body of texts that have been forgotten or become unavailable. And there's a useful reference to this in the science fiction world. Theodore Sturgeon, one of the famous SF writers, made this quote, during a speech, and that was published in Venture magazine. Using the same standards that categorize 90% of science fiction as trash, crud, or crap, it can be argued that 90% of film, literature, consumer goods, etc., is crap. Now, whether you agree with that or not, clearly, scholarly activity around literature and collecting practices at libraries have been structured largely by this idea. As a result, we have, significant works of literary scholarship using data analysis like Ted Underwood's Distant Horizons that admits, there are huge gaps in the literature that's available. In particular, pulp magazines from mid-century, and I think you can include with that the paperback revolution, are a sort of materials that aren't really available to scholars right now. This is actually a visualization from that book, Ted Underwood's essay, The Life Cycles of Genres, where he takes a few hundred books of science fiction and tries to estimate the likelihood they are science fiction based on that kind of logistic regression. And part of the point here is this is a very small data set that he had to work with. And I think there's a lot of reason we should be excited that a new wave of digital humanities work will have more substantial data available to them, including thanks to HathiTrust. So where Temple comes in is with a collection called the Paskow Science Fiction Collection. It was established in 1972 with a donation by Temple alumnus David C. Paskow to the Temple Library Special Collections Research Center. A former HTRC curator compiled the materials from vocational donors, limited exchanges with libraries, and sales from collectors and organizations like the SFRA. It contains approximately 12,000 SF paperback books and magazines, with some rare books by people like H.G. Wells, but the majority of it is paperbacks that you could buy online, in some cases for $5 used. And the fact of the matter is the collection doesn't get that much use in person. And partly what this project began to explore was how does the Paskow collection compare to other repositories out there? And thanks to assistance from Natalie Fulkerson a few years ago, we cross-checked the Paskow collection with HathiTrust repository, identifying that 2/3 are not in HathiTrust, 3,000 items are held by only one member library, and half are held by 5 or fewer. And so what was interesting about this is while these books might seem, mass market, there was an argument to be made for preservation risk, that they were held by few enough member libraries, right, that this is one justification for digitizing the books would be purely to ensure, materials don't degrade and that these materials aren't lost. Now, Temple's digitization project was kind of a fortuitous, incident. Around the time that I arrived, we were preparing to move to a brand new library called the Charles Library, reevaluating various collections and doing normal kind of deaccessioning. And the project allowed for kind of new collaborations to start between our Digital Scholarship Center, now known as the Scholar Studio, with the Special Collections Research Center, metadata and digitization services, and learning technology development. And I can, at the end, I have a thank you slide with everyone who's been involved, but it's important to say this is one of those projects that takes a village. Almost everyone who I work with in some capacity was involved at various stages of this project, helping to design it or contribute to it. And it was certainly seen as a kind of model for how library DH projects can serve as a platform for teaching, research, and data curation or other forms of curation. So the majority of what we did can be encompassed in the, or are doing, this is all very in progress, can be encompassed in the 7 things. And I call it digitizing the new wave because the majority of the texts in this collection are from the new wave era, which is really, the late 50s through the 70s. And you can see a bunch of the kind of classic books right there. So the way this project developed was first by digitizing the materials, which involved OCRing them. There's various ways we've tried to exhibit the materials, and I'll show some examples of that. And then we ingested the data sets into HathiTrust. Once they were in HathiTrust, one of the ways that I engaged with students and faculty at Temple and around in other areas was to run workshops on text mining the HathiTrust Research Center's, various tools they have. And along with that, there's been an ongoing project to explore what are the legal frameworks that can enable libraries to share data like this. So if Temple wanted to exchange data with another university that has their own SF collection they're digitizing, what would that look like? And then finally, there's been ongoing work to develop various types of derived data sets, also known as extracted features of the copyrighted works that could be shared publicly, and to develop a data capsule, which I'll talk about at the end. We also received a grant to do research on a specific subgenre of science fiction known as climate fiction, using data analysis methods. And that's the project that has really been stalled through the pandemic and is just now kind of getting off its feet. But there's kind of always been this vision of having students and staff and faculty working on the data to both research how to understand it better and how to share it better with other researchers by, for instance, identifying a range of subgenres that various books could be categorized into. So in particular, the Temple New Wave corpus, what we ended up with, we started with about 100 linear feet of deaccession materials, and myself and other graduate students slowly parsed through this material. Like I said, the majority is from the New Wave. We compared the corpus with other digital collections and tried to select the ones that we thought were, both valuable, rare, uncommon, not already in repositories. And we selected about 800 books, 800 magazines to digitize, and about a fourth of those are anthologies or short stories. So far, we've scanned about 400 books, ingested 250 into HathiTrust, and we're about to ingest another 125. And that's an interesting number. We still have a lot more we could do. I think it's important to say this has never been a top digitization project at the library, not least because it's copyrighted works. And so I've always kind of seen this project as something that can happen at the margins of digitization prioritization in a given library, but over the long array can produce an enormous amount of material. So 400 books is a lot of words, and to someone who's interested in these books as data, it would be more than enough for really interesting analysis on top of what's already in HathiTrust. But the hope is that this project would expand and more universities would start to digitize their materials in the same way. So one thing I wanted to point out is when we first started digitizing these, we would, the first time they guillotined them and removed the spines. And so you can see a bunch of the spines over on the right. I thought they were, aesthetically very compelling on their own. And a student of ours, Laura Biesadecki, actually made a little collage of those spines. So anyway, I love the kind of physical aspect of these books, and it's easy to lose that when we shift over to kind of complicated concepts of non-consumptive research with literature. But you get a sense of the range of titles, the range of styles to the cover art. The cover artists themselves were often ignored or forgotten, and there's a whole story there to explore. But so, after we scanned them and did an OCR process, there was a kind of HathiTrust digital ingestion workflow that involved collaboration between our Digital Scholarship Center, the metadata digitization services, and other library management. And I think a lot of libraries are familiar with this process. It's important to say it was the first time Temple did it, and there was a lot that we had to learn for this kind of grassroots digitization project. And we've been grateful to the support we've received from HathiTrust, and really interested in helping to improve the process so more small digitization projects can contribute their work to HathiTrust, with the idea of identifying these kinds of hidden collections. So if you go to the HathiTrust Digital Library and you search original location Temple University, you should be able to find all of our materials. I think if there was one link I would give you all to just kind of use as a hub, it would actually be our Omeka site. You can find this link in there, and then you can go browse these materials as you like. But the kind of driving, I would say, premise of this project, what I've been really inspired by is a quote from the Santa Barbara Statement on Collections as Data. If you're not familiar with collections as data, it's a movement to explore how library collections of all sorts can be made available as data. It's very broad. But this very kind of compelling phrase, collections as data designed for everyone, serve no one, I think is something worth meditating upon. And the mission of an organization like HathiTrust is naturally to provide an enormous amount of material to as many people as possible. And part of what I think has inspired a lot of the work we've been doing is trying to think, well, beyond what we can do with HathiTrust, how can we design collections for specific audiences interested in this material in kind of multifaceted ways so they can access it, at least within the confines of the law. And so, the first question kind of that arises that is an ongoing conversation with what's called the Science Fiction Collecting Libraries Consortium, is that there's 20-something other special collections out there with amazing science fiction materials. These are just some of them. So far, our primary collaborators at Temple have been at University of Kansas and Texas A&M. But I think a lot of these organizations are doing their own digitization projects, not necessarily with the goal of ingesting the HathiTrust, but one of the hopes for me is this kind of formation of a larger group of science fiction organizations that would work together to consolidate digitization across their various libraries, to share material among them, and to contribute to HathiTrust. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of all these great resources around the country and in other countries nearby. So as I mentioned, we made an Omeka page. You can go check out in the link in the chat. This was kind of an attempt to do something. I think this was at the start of the pandemic when everything was kind of stalled. It was a good way for our team to learn how to use Omeka S, and it was also an opportunity to kind of explore our love for the book covers and the premises of these books. While we can't share the full text within fair use, we were able to, still upload a bunch of book cover art, provide metadata about it, and try to draw out, the kind of hilarious descriptions that often accompany these books, identify what common themes they have. So these are just samples of some of the books that you can find on there. This doesn't even begin to touch, the tip of the iceberg of kind of all the wild books that you find in the paperback revolution. I'm sure you're all familiar with them in various ways. It was a book, The Gods Hate Kansas is one of my favorite titles. Like, just all kinds of hilarious things from the 50s on, many of which clearly have, speculative precedent for us today. So anyway, you can go to the Omeka page to see, what we were allowed to share publicly on our own without really worry of any kind of, copyright law violation. But outside of doing this, there's not much we can do. We can't upload a whole book for everyone to download, right? So we started kind of mapping out, well, what can we do? Thanks to Gabe Gulson for working with me on this at Temple. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you can see the recording later. This was an attempt to map out a risk assessment for providing non-consumptive access to something and when it would be possible to allow someone to download the full text data sets. There's a lot of interesting questions with these works around orphaned works, other aspects of copyright law that some of these may fit into loopholes. If you're not familiar with the New York Public Library's project to digitize the catalog of copyright renewals, there's a lot of promise there for identifying that some of these books, they never had their copyright renewed. And sorry, just to make sure everyone is on the same page about this. So one of the kind of very intimidating terms that I've been using and that you probably can find, you've seen in reference to HathiTrust, is non-consumptive. It's also sometimes used to refer to it as non-expressive. We're all used to consuming books, right? You read them. This is a way of referring to maybe counting how many words appear in a book, but never actually reading the book, right? If I don't buy a book, technically I'm not legally allowed to read it unless I borrow it from the library, but it gets more complicated with digital lending. And so there's a lot of opportunities for scholars in digital humanities and cultural analytics to access materials purely on a non-consumptive form. And it's a space that HathiTrust has really set the legal precedent for, but it opens a lot of doors for libraries to provide, copyrighted literature or other types of restricted data of all sorts to researchers. So, one good example of this is HathiTrust Bookworm. If you're not familiar with it, it's definitely worth checking out. Ben Schmidt has done a lot of great work with this tool, making it adaptable for other purposes. We've been in conversation about essentially having a portable version of Bookworm so that I could run it on our local data set in various ways. But Bookworm is hooked up to the HathiTrust Digital Library, and you should be able to go in there and count words, right, across a large volume of books. So this is a good example of non-consumptive research. And what's lovely about Bookworm is it allows you to facet by metadata, and it's very user-friendly. The downside is, most researchers aren't going to be able to get all of their work done here. It provides a nice kind of background view, like the Google Ngram viewer, of maybe some cultural shift. But if you really want to analyze these books in detail, you have to access them in other ways. And so one of the cool ways that HathiTrust has made access to this data available is what's called Feature Reader. And basically what they've done is they've taken a large set of their data, they've disaggregated it, they've extracted features from it, and then they've made those features available. So each word with part of speech tagging, named entities, if it's a place name, for instance, is all available in a kind of downloadable data set that doesn't violate copyright and still allows you to do kind of similar analyses, to what you can do here. So there's a nice programming historian tutorial about using the feature reader. It's a Python script. And, it's something we've been teaching students how to do. But we also tried to create kind of our own script to extract the features from our corpus. And that's partly because the HathiTrust extracted features data is not easy to work with. It's a complicated data set. And so one of our graduate students, Jeff Anson, wrote a script in R You can find it on the Scholar Studio GitHub. And what it does is it just chunks the text into chapters and breaks those chapters down into bags of words documents. A bag of words means, just each word disaggregated, disorganized. You don't know the order in that chapter that any word occurred. And that might not sound super useful, but it's enough for certain types of analysis. So Brianna Brinkley, a master's student at Kansas University, ended up publishing her thesis using our data set and the extracted features we provided her. She did topic modeling, which is a way of looking at how themes rise and fall across a novel. And this is one example of what we can do by extracting features and sharing them with people without needing to worry about violating copyright law. It still presents, serious factor learning curve to work with this type of material. And in the end, extracted features data sets are limited. You can't do a lot of the most popular machine learning methods today using an extracted features data set. A lot of machine learning requires the full text. And so this is kind of an ongoing, I think, question and problem, but there are other tools that are useful out there. Before I get to that, this is kind of an example of some of the websites I've been inspired by that, I hope that the science fiction project can create. That there would be a website like this, where there's a bunch of tools that allow you to explore the data in a disaggregated form. I highly suggest checking both these out. Indiana University's Observatory of Social Media takes a big data set of Twitter and then allows you to use these ready-made tools to explore it. Yale University's DH Lab created Robots Reading Vogue, where they took Vogue, a copyrighted set of works, and then broke them down into extracted features and made various visualization tools. Allowed students to work on it. This is very much kind of where we've been going with our project. And you still end up facing the same problem of these don't let researchers fully access the data. So HathiTrust has another solution to that problem. And it's called the Data Capsule. This screenshot here is of HathiTrust's Data Capsule when you log into the user interface. It's a virtual machine using Ubuntu with preloaded libraries on it. You can see here Voyant is a user-friendly text mining tool that they've already installed. And now the Data Capsule is not user-friendly unto itself. So you're remote connecting to another computer. And then what happens in that Data Capsule is you cannot access the internet at the same time as you are accessing the data. So you can log into this Data Capsule, you're logged into this other computer, you can download things you need, but then if you want to access the data, you have to mount it on this virtual machine. And you have to go into what's called secure mode. So basically, there's still some onerous steps, but the idea is users can go into a computer, fully access the data, conceivably even read it if they wanted to, but technically they shouldn't be. Manipulate those text files however they want to do whatever analysis they want to do. And then when they're done, they can go back, they can essentially export their results. It requires approval from HathiTrust admin. But a lot of scholars have been using the Data Capsule as well as some of the other resources I've shown to do their research. And it's certainly one of the most established models. There's a lot I could say about proprietary databases that are beginning to create their own portals for text mining. But interestingly, I think none of them have yet tried to do a Data Capsule model. They're more doing things similar to the HTRC feature reader, where they have Jupyter notebooks that allow you to access the data within some kind of controlled environment. So the reason I bring this up is the Data Capsule has a lot of potential, but one of the problems is it's a centralized resource and it's only available, you can only access it through HathiTrust collection. I, as the person who ingested the materials into HathiTrust, have no control at this point on how researchers access it. the advantage is you can go into their data capsule and access all of HathiTrust Digital Library. But there's been a lot of interesting work going on, in particular being led by a professor at Indiana University, Kouper, who I've been working with to create a version of the data capsule that would be portable, that would allow me at the Digital Scholarship Center to create a data capsule for you to access our data, where I could be on the back end putting the data in there, and you would be on the front end being able to analyze it however you like, and we could have a conversation about that kind of complicated curation, right? So they actually started on this project a while ago. Indiana University, back in 2017, started adapting HathiTrust's data capsule into a new, new version. They tested it out with various libraries. I think around the time of the pandemic, everything slowed down. And it was around then that I got in touch, I think through Ryan at HathiTrust with Kouper to start talking about, hey, could we build one of these? As you can see, that quote at the bottom is from one of the users. We judged that the resource investments necessary outweigh for now the possible benefits of placing our collection within a HathiTrust data capsule. So I think, that I think is a quote maybe towards the HathiTrust Research Center and the complicated process of ingesting materials into it to get them available there. But my impression was that the universities that tested the portable version back in 2017 had similar issues around the technical needs required of library IT to support, a portable version at their local institution. So when we began working at Temple University, it was kind of picking up. We were the last kind of institution on the grant, but it was also kind of picking up the project where it had been left off and trying to re-envision where it can go from here. Just to give a little more of like the background on the data capsule, you can kind of see in this visualization here, the difference between, secure mode when you're able to access data storage, and when you're in maintenance mode, you can access the internet to install external software in the data capsules. This is a kind of what it looks like from the user's perspective. But on the other end of things, the curator would be providing data into the data capsules and establishing these individual VMs through software architecture that looks a little like this. And I'm not going to get into all the details because I don't think this is primarily, we actually did this presentation at Code for Live recently, and that was a natural place for this. It's a containerized setup that doesn't use, if you're familiar with it, Docker. And I think one of the plans is that we would Dockerize this to make the architecture cleaner. But there's various limitations to the data capsule through HathiTrust or locally. There's problems with physical hardware, getting it to work with GPUs. There's a lot of prerequisites and dependencies that need to be set up. And then there is a kind of mess of different docs and different tools in different places. And so one of the things we did during this process was kind of consolidate all of that into one place. And so we have a GitHub repo now that contains the kind of up-to-date data capsule appliance with the relevant documentation. And we've deployed an instance that's still kind of in the works. And at this point, we're kind of scoping and rebuilding the capsule over this year and the next year to try to kind of rethink how to make it more sustainable. I think what's been exciting is to recognize that partly through the Sci-Fi project and the collaboration with HathiTrust, and maybe also the place that our library is at, I think we do have the kind of administrative infrastructure in place, the technical know-how, people in positions like me who can curate the data and do the kind of administrative overhead that HathiTrust handles. And so, I'm optimistic that, all of these various methods of curating materials, both through HathiTrust and locally, they're all very science fictional, right? data capsule sounds very science fictional. The idea of looking at visualizations of books to understand them without ever reading the book is kind of science fictional. So I see this project as still very kind of future thinking and speculative, and trying to figure out how is it possible for individual libraries like ours to, take ownership of the data that we produce, like this beautiful book, and make it available to researchers in any way possible, both by leaning on amazing organizations like HathiTrust and learning from them, about how we can build our own kind of little HathiTrust Research Center at our university. So kind of to summarize, there's a lot of interesting models for digitizing and curating copyrighted literature. HathiTrust fulfills a lot of researcher and curators' needs in the field of digital scholarship, but we also have demands to develop infrastructure and workflows for diversifying forms of digitization access at our local institutions. And grassroots digitization projects like this need different types of support from organizations like HathiTrust, as well as from their local institution. So the next step for us, I'm very excited that this project called The Stories We Tell Ourselves, the Cultural Analytics of Climate Fiction is finally moving forward. And so what we're currently doing is ingesting more science fiction books into the HathiTrust Digital Library. These are specifically works focused on climate, broadly speaking. And so partly what we'll be interested in doing is building subgenre data sets of, books about the plague, books about the world freezing, books about the world burning, and identifying all this kind of really fascinating metadata that can help scholars find and explore the materials. And then there's kind of an ongoing project to develop legal frameworks that can make libraries feel comfortable sharing this kind of data among each other. And I'm optimistic that both of these kind of will grow in the coming years, but I would love to hear from anyone if they have interest in these projects. And I wanted to finish by thanking everyone who's been involved, and you can see it's a long list, and it's a growing list of graduate students at Temple who I hope, by working on this project, learn a lot about digital humanities work and library work. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to everyone here who was able to attend. I'll stop sharing and welcome any questions.
Thanks, Alex. Anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat. We do have one question you may or may not be able to answer. Anna Auburn has scanned many pulp covers for analysis of art and style. Determining and crediting the artist is difficult. Would love it if anyone knows of a way to research the often unnamed cover artists.
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. I think partly what has interested me with this project is I asked questions like that, and then I realized there aren't that many people trying to answer that question. There's not a scholar I'm immediately jumping to tell you about. There's definitely some important works out there, but this is a kind of interesting area to explore, and not enough people are doing it, so I would encourage you to. In my experience, ISFDB has the best information you're going to find. ISFDB.org is essentially a fan site, and there's definitely going to be issues with the reliability of their metadata, and that's something we've been exploring. There's ways I think ISFDB and HathiTrust and related organizations could help improve that, but they often have a lot of the information from secondary sources. Even if a cover artist isn't identified in the book, they may be listed there. There's also a lot of cover artists who did, a ton of work over their lifetime and not necessarily credited for all of them. I'm blanking on the name of one of them, but there was actually a museum exhibit here in Philly at a gallery where they showcased his book cover art and other art, and it was awesome. They had a whole shelf or a whole wall of just paperback books with the book covers on display. So yeah, it's a good question. Let me know if you do figure out any other tricks.
Here's another one. What are your thoughts on the kinds of legal infrastructure needed to support this kind of work?
That's a great question. So, I mean, HathiTrust has provided an interesting precedent, but it doesn't have clear hold over individual libraries. I think there's two things. There's what's illegal, and then what's perceived as possibly so illegal it's not worth doing the risk. And a lot of this is in that gray area where, you know, I do think that libraries are so risk averse, and well, more so universities are so risk averse, that these projects often don't get started in the first place because there's an assumption the material will never be shareable. I have a feeling, so what we've been working on is there's a series of scholars in the legal field. I can cite some of them. Matthew Sagg has written a great book on the legal case for text mining. And they've done a lot of work along with HathiTrust to kind of justify non-consumptive research as, you know, not a violation of copyright. It's a kind of different question around, can my library digitize materials and share it with your library and you give them to me? And from what I understand, libraries do this all the time. It's usually, avoiding setting a precedent. Maybe it's a single material from special collections. It's a very different thing to add. If we were to, for instance, advertise, all of the science fiction libraries in the country are going to work together and share all of our data. You can easily imagine, mass market companies, producers of this fiction becoming very concerned, and same with Science Fiction Writers Association. And so what I'm working with various lawyers on trying to develop a framework for would be, exactly that kind of exchange. And it's really all about, in the end, how do you make people in positions like me who are curating data or curating various materials, how do you make them feel like they know what to do and what is legal and what's not legal? And so in the end, what we're kind of expecting will be the deliverable from a lot of this work will be essentially like best practices for non-consumptive data curation. And that might even mean something like, when is data disaggregated enough that the original text couldn't be rebuilt from it, right? But it's also saying, what are the requirements for security that this data has to be kept under at any given library? And if we were to exchange it with another library to build our data sets, what kind of administrative hurdles, technical firewalls, et cetera, we would need to set up to ensure this material was safe. At a small scale, it's not, that serious of an issue, but, when you're looking at 100,000 books, it is. I should also say, there's two resources I didn't bring up today that I kind of love. One, the Internet Archive has a huge collection. It's called the Pulp Magazine Archive. I'm pretty sure none of it should legally be up there, right? But this is the whole thing with Internet Archive. So you can go and you can get it all OCR, all these Pulp Magazine from there. None of that could be ingested into HathiTrust because we don't know its provenance. The other archive that I always recommend to people is called luminous.org. And it is essentially a rogue archive by semi-religious people who believe they can enlighten the world by digitizing pulp magazines. And if you go to luminous.org, you will visit their archives section. It's not so easy to find beneath like images from William Blank and other things. They have an archive section and a periodical section. You'll find tons of SF periodicals there as well. So I bring that up just to say, there's kind of a variety of ways researchers are accessing this material. I think the legal infrastructure needed to support this work at an institution like mine is not all that much more than is already there. It's mostly providing confidence for the curator that they're not violating the law, and some steps towards, what are the right tools, what are the right methods, in an ideal world, we could, the libraries would have an easier time communicating with the legal counsel at any given institution. And I think that will also have to be part of this, of a kind of what you described as the legal infrastructure, is there has to be some relationship there that can continue those conversations. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Please do reach out if you have more questions about that. I think it's kind of there's a lot of discussion around this in the text data mining community, but it's often happening on the research side more than on the library side. And I think collections as data movement is one of the natural places for where it comes up. But it's still a big gap. And I think it'll take, national forums and other large scale discussions to kind of raise awareness about this and make people feel more comfortable taking risks, sharing kind of copyrighted data in various ways. Yeah, I mean, to Melissa, to your point, what's interesting is some of the lawyers involved, would say even the consumptive types of uses are justified within fair use. And even if that were proven to be true, I think institutions would still be very hesitant to do it. And so that's why I say there's kind of like the legal infrastructure, but then there's more the organizational infrastructure. How does staff feel supported in doing that? I don't want to lose my job for providing data to the wrong person, then we get a lawsuit, right? So it's an ideological issue too, and a cultural one. And it's a lot bigger than, any one project. I see a couple other comments. Not really sure what SFR is.
Yeah, there are a couple of links, I think, that were put in the chat related to our first question about researching unnamed cover artists.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Anybody else have any questions for Alex today? Are there other genres or fields you see as particularly ripe for this kind of approach?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So why science fiction? I do think science fiction has a certain hold on the population as like both popular and intellectual. But, all mass market books deserve the same attention, and romance, detective fiction essentially needs the same treatment. There's going to be as many books in each of those genres: adventure novels, westerns. So, I think the bigger vision for this would be a pulp fiction database, right? One that kind of stands out for me is a librarian at Villanova, Damien, who does a lot of work with choose your own adventure novels, which I think have a really unique appeal here because they are inherently encoded documents, right? Go to page 11 if you choose this path, go to page 12 if you choose this path. So from a digital analysis perspective, there's so much interesting material there that could be explored, and choose your own adventure novels cross all of the kind of genres: science fiction, adventure, romance. So yeah, I think, all of these have the same kind of appeal, and it really should be seen by libraries as material that needs to be prioritized more. Something I didn't talk about enough, but has been a motivating influence here, is the sense that a lot of authors from diverse backgrounds are likely to have published in these, genres that aren't considered as literary, and as a result have been forgotten or ignored. The other project that I was just thinking of is there's a project to digitize dime novels that is out of Villanova and I think University of Iowa. But if you look up digitizing dime novels, I think Clear's Hidden Collections grant funded at one point. That's a very similar, the major difference is they're doing non-copyrighted literature, so they can fully release everything they digitize. But they provide a great model for for kind of digitizing mass market in the 20th century.
Great. Any more questions? Great. Another second here, too.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. And please do reach out. You can find my email online. Always interested to find people who are working on similar projects, as well as, you know, people with just an interest in science fiction. Especially if you know any graduate students or researchers who want to do analysis on science fiction, I'm always happy to, you know, just advise their projects and point them to, you know, useful resources. One other resource I don't think I really mentioned is, because I couldn't find the link to it, but HathiTrust also has a work set now of science fiction materials that essentially collects in one place all the science fiction that's in HathiTrust. So that's one of the places I refer people to when they're going to mine HathiTrust. But yeah, thank you everyone. It's been great to be part of Community Week here.
Thank you all. We'll stay online for a few more minutes in case there are any more questions. And we look forward to seeing you at our future sessions the rest of this week. I'm going to stop the recording and see you all soon.